The hardest signature I ever made only took 3 seconds. Claire Morgan's hand trembled as she pressed the pen onto the crisp, white divorce papers, each stroke echoing in the empty penthouse filled with the soft glow of Christmas lights. The quiet of the room was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint wind rattling the windows. She set the pen down, her eyes lingering on the paper, the finality of it sinking in as her breath came out in visible wisps in the cold December air. Beside the stack of legal documents, she placed a small plastic stick, the pregnancy test that had changed everything, its 2 pink lines staring back at her with quiet accusation. Claire's heart ached with a mixture of resolve and sorrow, knowing that the man who had once held her world in his hands would never see this first, would never have the chance to hold the life she carried. Yet the act of leaving it behind was her own form of control, her silent declaration that she was reclaiming her future. She pulled her scarf tighter, feeling the chill creep through her coat as she took one last look at the room they had shared in happier times, now sterile and hollow under the twinkling lights of the abandoned Christmas tree, ornaments reflecting on the polished floor. Each memory of laughter, whispered secrets, and fragile promises now collided with the stark reality before her, and she felt a surge of both freedom and guilt. The snow began to fall outside, coating the city in a quiet, gentle blanket that contrasted with the storm in her chest, each flake reminding her that moments of beauty could exist even amid endings. Claire took a deep breath, letting the cold burn her lungs, the silence amplifying the gravity of her actions. She grabbed her coat, fastening it slowly as if to prolong the connection to the place she had called home. Her hand lingered for a second on the doorknob, a final gesture of farewell to the life she had known, and then she stepped into the night, the crunch of snow under her boots marking each step toward an uncertain future. The city lights shimmered through the falling snow, reflecting the myriad possibilities that awaited her. Yet the weight of the unspoken truth remained with her, the knowledge of the child she carried and the life she would raise without the man who had lost her. As she walked away from the penthouse, the quiet click of the door behind her felt louder than any bell, the world outside vast and indifferent, yet filled with the kind of hope that only comes after the deepest sorrow. Every step was a reminder that endings were often beginnings in disguise, that leaving could be an act of love, protection, and the assertion of self, and that even on the coldest Christmas Eve, the human heart could find its own warmth in making the hardest choices for those we protect most. Damien Russo returned to his penthouse later that evening, the city glittering below through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, unaware that Claire had left behind the final trace of their life together. The envelope with the divorce papers lay on the sleek marble countertop, the faint glow of Christmas lights reflecting off its crisp edges. He dropped his briefcase with a soft thud and ran a hand through his dark hair, expecting the usual holiday solitude, yet something felt off. His eyes fell on the paper, then slowly on the small white plastic stick sitting beside it, the pregnancy test stark and silent in the soft light. A cold realization wrapped around his chest, constricting his breath. The 2 pink lines seemed to pulse in rhythm with his racing heartbeat. He leaned forward, hand hovering over the envelope, feeling the weight of decisions made years ago, and the consequences now unavoidable. The memory of Claire's laughter, the warmth of her hands in his, and the unspoken promises they had carried through fleeting moments of happiness flooded his mind, contrasting sharply with the sterile emptiness of the penthouse. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily past the windows, layering the city in quiet white, but inside, Damien felt only the noise of his own thoughts echoing against the high ceilings. He picked up the pregnancy test, staring at it as if it could speak, as if it could tell him how to undo the irrevocable, but the silence was complete. For the first time in years, power and wealth seemed hollow. The empire he had built meant nothing against the fragility of human emotion and the irreversible passage of time. He sank into the leather armchair by the window, letting the city lights wash over him, his expression a mixture of disbelief, grief, and dawning understanding. Each tick of the clock marked the relentless movement of life without pause for regret, and Damien realized that the moment Claire had left was a turning point, a hinge between what was lost and what might still be saved. The soft glow from the Christmas tree reflected on the polished floor, glinting against the glass of the test, and he finally exhaled, a long, shuddering release, knowing that the night would be long, filled with reflection, and the first flickers of a journey he had to undertake to reclaim not his empire, but the woman and the child he had almost lost. Damien held the pregnancy test in his hands, staring at the 2 pink lines that seemed to burn into his vision as the Christmas lights flickered behind him. His chest tightened, a mix of disbelief and shock stealing his breath. The elegant penthouse suddenly felt impossibly large and empty, every luxurious detail emphasizing the absence of Claire, her laughter, her warmth, the life they had almost shared. He placed the test on the countertop, but his eyes could not leave it, tracing the faint shadows and reflections that danced across the polished surface. Memories of their arguments, their fleeting moments of tenderness, and the promises they had made to each other all collided in a chaotic rush, each thought sharper than the last. Snow began falling outside the windows, drifting silently against the backdrop of the city lights, each flake mirroring the cold weight settling in his chest. Damien sank into the leather chair by the window, pressing his forehead into his palm, realizing that in the time it had taken him to return home, the life he had taken for granted had shifted irreversibly. Every detail of Claire's absence, from the quiet echo of her steps that no longer filled the apartment to the untouched mug of tea on the counter, underscored the reality of her decision. The envelope with the divorce papers felt heavier than any briefcase he had carried, heavier than any burden of power or responsibility he had borne. He thought about the Christmases they had spent together, now tainted by his own inattention, and about the child he had never known he might have been holding in his arms. Damien's mind raced through possibilities, regrets, and the small merciless truths of consequence and time. The city outside glittered, indifferent and expansive, yet he felt a singular focus on the test, on Claire, and on the choice she had made. A shiver ran through him as he realized that the world he controlled, the empire he built, was meaningless in the face of this human reality, that love, responsibility, and redemption could not be bought or commanded. He exhaled slowly, feeling the first sting of tears he had not shed in years, knowing that from this moment, his actions, his remorse, and his pursuit would define the next chapter. The quiet hum of the penthouse, the soft glow of Christmas decorations, and the cold draft from the window converged into a solitary, cinematic moment of reckoning, forcing Damien to confront his failures, his love, and the path toward redemption, and he knew that nothing in the world outside these walls mattered as much as finding her and making what had been lost right. The longest night stretched across Damien Rousseau's penthouse, the city lights outside blurred by falling snow, each flake a silent witness to the unraveling of everything he had thought he controlled. He stood by the window, the divorce papers and pregnancy tests still on the countertop behind him, a stark reminder of the choices that had been made without his knowledge, the moments he had missed. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, eyes wide with disbelief, green irises shimmering against the golden glow of Christmas lights strung across the balcony. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the weight of years of neglect and the consequences of obsession pressing down on him, making the polished floor feel unbearably cold beneath his feet. Memories collided in his mind, Claire's laughter echoing in sunlit rooms, arguments over trivial matters that now seemed monumental. In hindsight, quiet evenings by the fireplace, moments of tenderness now tinged with irreversible loss. Each tick of the clock was a hammer striking against the fragile walls of his composure, reminding him that time had moved forward relentlessly, and he had been left behind. Damien sank into the leather armchair, eyes never leaving the pregnancy test, imagining the life that might have been, a child that would grow without knowing the warmth of his presence. Outside, the snow muffled the city's noises, creating a surreal silence that amplified every thought, every regret, every flicker of what could have been. He whispered her name softly, almost inaudibly, the sound swallowed by the winter air, and realized that the power he had wielded, the empire he had built, and the influence he commanded were meaningless against the gravity of human connection lost. His fingers brushed the cold marble surface where the papers lay, tracing the edges as if trying to feel through them the moment when life had shifted, when Claire had made the decision he had failed to anticipate. The glow of the Christmas tree reflected across the room, casting shadows that danced across the walls like specters of memory, and Damien felt an ache so deep it seemed to echo through the high ceilings. He breathed slowly, attempting to regain composure, yet the awareness of the journey ahead, the need to seek forgiveness, to confront his failures, and to find Claire before the moment passed completely, anchored him in a liminal space between despair and determination. Each second stretched, every memory a reminder of the fragile, fleeting nature of time and the heavy price of neglect. Damien knew that the night was only the beginning, that he had to navigate the cold streets of Manhattan, through snow and silence, to reach the woman who had left him with the most potent proof of both their past and the life they might yet have. The city around him glittered indifferently, but within the penthouse every shadow, every light, every reflection spoke the truth he could no longer ignore. Love, loss, and redemption were all entwined, and the first step toward reclaiming what had been lost would begin with seeking her under the silent, snowy witness of Christmas Eve. Claire stepped off the train into the quiet, snow-covered streets of the small town she had chosen as her refuge, the soft crunch of fresh snow under her boots mingling with the muted hum of distant Christmas lights. She drew her coat tighter, wrapping it around herself like a shield, feeling both the chill in the air and the strange lightness that came from having made a choice that was entirely her own. Every storefront glowed softly in the evening, windows decorated with garlands and twinkling lights, yet Claire's focus was inward, on the life she was beginning to build from scratch. She had rented a modest apartment above a bakery, the smell of fresh bread drifting up through the cracks in the floorboards, a small comfort in a world that felt suddenly unfamiliar and uncharted. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Damien, to the empire he had commanded, and the stark contrast between his life of power and her own quiet, deliberate steps through a street lined with bare trees. She paused under a street lamp, the soft halo of light falling across her face, catching the strands of hair that had escaped her scarf, and imagined him returning to his empty penthouse, discovering her absence and the message she had left behind. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a private smile, a fleeting acknowledgement of her own strength and the control she had reclaimed over her life and her choices. As she walked, she felt the city behind her, the faint echoes of car tires on icy roads, the distant carolers singing through the cold night, all creating a quiet, cinematic backdrop for her journey. Each step brought her closer to the small bakery where she had arranged to meet the owner in the morning, to start a routine that was hers and hers alone, yet the awareness of what she carried within her, the secret of new life, added a weight and a purpose to her movements. She paused to glance at a window display, a miniature nativity scene catching her eye, and felt the intersection of hope and regret settle around her heart like snow settling on rooftops. In this quiet town insulated from the chaos of the city and the life she had left behind, Claire felt both the loneliness of distance and the quiet thrill of possibility. The soft falling snow mirrored the tentative new beginning, each flake unique and transient, much like the choices she was making and the life she was preparing to nurture. Though she had left Damien and the penthouse far behind, the connection of what had been and what could yet be lingered like a subtle undertone, guiding her steps through the night, into a future both unknown and full of quiet promise. Damien moved through the snow-slick streets of Manhattan, his long coat brushing against his knees, each step a rhythmic echo of the urgency in his chest. The city's glow reflected off the icy pavements, neon lights blending with the soft white of falling snow, creating a surreal cinematic haze around him. He paused at the corner, taking in the quiet hum of traffic and distant holiday music, letting it contrast with the storm inside. Thoughts of Claire flooded him, her quiet strength, the way she had carried herself with grace even in the moments he had taken her for granted, and now the undeniable fact that she was pregnant and had left him without warning. Each memory collided with the harsh reality of his absence, the decisions he had made, the empire he had built, and yet the emptiness he now felt. His mind raced through streets, neighborhoods, and memories, tracing where she might have gone, piecing together the hints she had left behind in subtle gestures, and the careful planning of her departure. Every storefront, every shadowed alley seemed to hold potential clues. The twinkling holiday displays mocked him with cheer he could not feel. Damien's hand brushed against his scarf as the cold wind cut through him, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, heavier than any business decision or boardroom choice he had ever faced. He imagined Claire in a small, warmly lit apartment somewhere, perhaps curled up with a book, glancing out the window at the snow, unaware of the man hunting for her with desperation tempered by remorse. His heart pounded not with anger but with a raw ache, a need to protect, to make amends, to reach her before the holiday passed and their connection slipped further into distance. He breathed in the cold night air, letting it sharpen his resolve, each flake of snow a reminder that time was both fleeting and relentless. Damien had built empires, commanded loyalty, and controlled fear, but none of that mattered here. What mattered was Claire, the child she carried, and the chance to right what had been wrong. With each step forward, he made silent promises, mentally tracing routes, rehearsing what he might say, how he might act when he found her, knowing that apology alone would not suffice. The city around him, with its indifferent lights and quiet beauty, served as the backdrop for his solitary journey, a night of reckoning and pursuit, as Damien Rousseau moved not as a king of the underworld, but as a man desperate to reclaim the woman and the life he had nearly lost, and the snow fell gently around him, marking each step of a path he hoped would lead to redemption. The morning after Christmas Eve arrived beneath a sky painted in soft shades of silver and white, and Claire stood by the apartment window above the bakery, watching snow drift gently across the quiet main street. The scent of fresh bread rose from below, filling the small space with warmth that contrasted against the winter landscape outside. She wrapped both hands around a steaming mug of tea and allowed herself a rare moment of peace. For the first time in years, there were no meetings to attend, no expectations to satisfy, no endless waiting for someone else's priorities to make room for her existence. Yet despite the calm, her thoughts drifted toward Damien more often than she wanted to admit. Hundreds of miles away, Damien sat inside a private car moving steadily through the snowy countryside. The city skyline had long disappeared behind him. In its place were frozen lakes, snow-covered forests, and small towns decorated with holiday lights. A single piece of paper rested on the seat beside him. It contained the address of the bakery where Claire had recently accepted part-time work. It had taken almost 24 hours of careful searching, conversations, and retracing her recent steps to find it. Damien stared out the window, watching the winter landscape blur past, feeling the unfamiliar weight of uncertainty. For the first time in his life, success offered no advantage. There was no deal to negotiate, no problem to solve with influence or money. There was only a woman he had hurt and the possibility that she might never forgive him. Back in the apartment, Claire finished her tea and prepared for her shift downstairs. The bakery owner, a kind woman named Margaret, greeted her with a warm smile the moment she entered the kitchen. The scent of cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh pastries filled the air. Customers arrived steadily throughout the morning, escaping the cold and seeking comfort in coffee and holiday treats. Claire found herself smiling more than she had expected. The simple rhythm of the town felt healing, familiar, human. Around noon, the bell above the bakery door rang. Claire was arranging pastries inside a display case and barely glanced up at first. Then she heard a voice. Deep, familiar. The tray slipped slightly in her hands. Her heartbeat stopped. Slowly, she lifted her eyes toward the entrance. Damien stood there. Snow dusted the shoulders of his dark coat. The cold air followed him inside. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The bakery faded away. The customers disappeared. Even the music playing softly overhead seemed to vanish. There was only him, standing exactly where she never expected to see him again. Damien's green eyes met hers across the room. They looked different somehow. Softer. Tired. Honest. Claire felt every emotion she had spent weeks trying to control rise to the surface at once. Shock. Relief. Anger. Longing. Fear. Damien took a single step forward before stopping himself. He seemed to understand that this moment belonged to her. Not him. Not the past. Her. The silence stretched between them until it became almost unbearable. Then Damien spoke quietly, his voice carrying across the bakery without force. Claire. Hearing her name in his voice again felt like reopening a wound that had never truly healed. He swallowed hard before continuing. I am not here to change your mind. His eyes lowered, briefly before returning to hers. I am here because there are things I should have said a long time ago. And for the first time since she left the penthouse, Claire realized that this conversation would decide the future of all three of them. The tension in the bakery hung like a fragile thread, each second stretching impossibly long as Claire and Damien stood facing one another. Snowflakes clung to the glass panes, catching the afternoon sun in a prism of light, and the soft hum of the oven and the scent of warm bread created an almost surreal calm around them. Claire's hands tightened around the edge of the counter, the porcelain mug she had been holding forgotten as memories of the past rushed forward, unbidden. Shared Christmases, whispered arguments, fleeting touches, and promises now suspended in time. Damien took a careful step closer, yet the space between them seemed insurmountable, filled with unspoken words and the weight of consequence. He kept his voice steady, though his green eyes betrayed the storm beneath, and said, "I should have been here sooner, but I needed to understand how to make this right." Claire's gaze wavered, her breath catching as she processed the gravity of his presence and the vulnerability he showed, a side of him rarely seen by anyone. Outside, the town moved quietly, the muffled sounds of distant bells and the occasional crunch of snow underfoot marking the rhythm of the world beyond the bakery walls. Damien's hands, once instruments of command and control, rested gently at his sides, the contrast striking against the intensity of his aura. He gestured subtly toward the small chair near the counter, an invitation without pressure, a bridge across the gulf of months apart. Claire's eyes flickered, caught between mistrust and the deep-seated knowledge that this man, powerful and commanding, had also been the center of a life she once shared, and that the child she carried linked them in ways impossible to sever. The light shifting through the window played across Damien's features, softening the angles, revealing the man behind the facade of authority, a man capable of care and remorse. Each heartbeat between them felt amplified, echoing across the small space, and time seemed suspended, allowing reflection, understanding, and recognition of mutual loss and longing. Claire exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain in part, yet aware that decisions lay ahead, choices that would shape the next chapter of both their lives. Damien spoke again, voice low and deliberate, emphasizing each word. "I am not asking you to return to the past. I am asking you to consider what we might protect together, starting now." The quiet determination in his tone resonated with Claire's own buried feelings of responsibility and hope. Around them, the world continued in soft motion, but inside the bakery, a new current had begun, fragile yet potent, carrying with it the possibility of reconciliation, understanding, and the first steps toward a future neither could have foreseen alone, each aware that the next actions they took would define the trajectory of their intertwined lives and the unborn life that now tied their fates inextricably together. Claire looked at Damien for a long moment, the bakery around them fading into a blur of warm lights, fresh bread, and softly falling snow beyond the windows. The world seemed to narrow until only the two of them remained, standing at the edge of a future neither had expected to face together again. Her heart beat steadily now, no longer driven by shock but by clarity. For months she had imagined this moment in countless ways. Some versions ended with anger. Others ended with silence. None of them looked like this. Damien stood before her without defenses, without pride, without the certainty that had always surrounded him. For the first time since she had known him, he looked like a man willing to lose everything if it meant telling the truth. Claire slowly stepped out from behind the counter. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath her boots. Damien did not move. He allowed her to control the distance between them. That small act meant more than any speech. When she finally stopped a few feet away, she looked directly into his eyes. "I cannot pretend the past did not happen." Her voice was calm but steady. Damien nodded immediately. "I know." Snow drifted outside the windows as afternoon light filled the bakery with a soft golden glow. Claire placed a hand gently against her stomach. The gesture was small, yet it carried the weight of everything that had changed. Damien's eyes followed the movement. Emotion flashed across his face before he quickly composed himself. Not because he wanted to hide it, but because he respected the moment too much to make it about himself. Claire noticed. She noticed everything. The silence between them felt different now. Softer. More honest. "I left because I needed to find myself again," she said quietly. "Not because I stopped caring." The admission hung between them. Damien lowered his gaze briefly before looking back at her. Relief and regret blended together in his expression. "I never stopped caring either." For the first time, neither statement felt like a wound. They felt like truth. Outside, children laughed somewhere in the distance as they played in the snow. Christmas decorations sparkled throughout the town square. Life continued around them. Simple. Beautiful. Unaware of the significance of this moment, Claire smiled faintly. It was small. Fragile. Real. Damien smiled too. Not the confident smile that had once dominated boardrooms and negotiations. A grateful one. Human one. Then Claire took a slow breath and made her decision. I am not promising forever today. Damien nodded. I would not ask for that. I am not promising that everything will be easy. Again he nodded. I understand. Claire's smile widened slightly. But I am willing to see what happens next. The words settled over both of them like sunlight after a storm. Damien closed his eyes for a brief second, absorbing the gift she was offering. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Something more valuable. A chance. The bakery door opened as another customer entered from the cold, and life immediately rushed back into the room. Yet everything felt different. Lighter. Hopeful. Damien reached into his coat pocket and carefully removed a small silver ornament shaped like a snowflake. I bought this before Christmas, he admitted quietly. I never thought I would actually get to give it to you. Claire accepted it, turning it gently in her hand as light reflected across its surface. Then she looked up and smiled. Outside, snow continued falling across the town, covering old footprints while leaving room for new ones. And as they stood together beneath the warm glow of the bakery lights, both of them finally understood something that had taken years to learn. Sometimes the greatest gift Christmas brings is not a miracle. It is a second chance to become the people we should have been all along.